Thanks, Charles, and good afternoon, coaches. First off, I want to thank Charles Davis, who I believe is one of the best analysts in football, for being our host this week. As Charles said, I'm David Graff, co-founder and CEO here at Huddle, and I'm honored to be joined by so many of you here at Blitz 21. This pandemic has reinforced why we planted our flag in high school football over a decade ago. Because you're not just football coaches, you're the foundation of your community. You're its source of pride. And it's that passion that has helped fuel all of us here at Huddle too. We know how hard this past year has been for so many of you, which is why we were committed to making this a free event, and we hope you're able to take some time away from all that craziness and get a lot out of everything we have planned for you this week. Through it all, through one of the most challenging years of your career, you kept your trust in Huddle products. But trust is a two-way street. We have to continue rewarding your trust in us by continuing to deliver innovation in ways that keeps you ahead of the curve. That's why the next evolution of Huddle is going to be instantaneous, without you even having to lift a finger. To show you where we're going, though, I think it's important first to tell you about how we got here. 15 years ago, I was a grad assistant at the University of Nebraska under Bill Callahan, who ended up becoming Huddle's first customer. I have plenty of fun stories about how those first conversations went, but I thought it'd be fun to hear from somebody who was on that team, helping guide our vision, and who has now reached the pinnacle of the coaching profession. Please join me in welcoming Zac Taylor, my close friend and the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. Zac, thanks a lot for joining.
Thanks a lot for having me, Dave.
Can you just share with us what you remember from those early days at Huddle?
I remember a lot. I think it was 2007 when I first started getting around you guys as you guys were working through Huddle. And what I remember is a tiny little office on 9th Street with you, Brian Kaiser, and John Wirtz, sitting at a table, and there might have been a couple other tables thrown in there, but it wasn't a very big room, and just working through the basics of what y'all's vision for Huddle was going to be. And to see how that's evolved over the last, whatever it's been, 14, 15 years is really impressive. I'm glad I got to see it from the jump and see what it's become now. And it's really been impressive, and you guys should certainly be very proud.
I think you're too kind. But a fact, we haven't talked about in a little while, you were actually one of Huddle's first employees, helping us brainstorm some new features. If I remember correctly, the main project you helped us on was a scattering reports feature. So what do you remember from those kind of early product days?
Yeah, that was one of the first questions I remember y'all had as guys who didn't play college football. Just what goes into a week of preparation for college players and coaches, and so just trying to find ways where graduate assistants could drop game plans onto the Huddle app, so the players could easily find them whether they were in the building, in a meeting, or at home. Scattering reports on particular players, certain game plan adjustments, things like that you wanted in the app. A lot of things that we deal with now that we have, it wasn't really available to people back in 2006, 2007, 2008, and you guys were trying to find a way to make that happen. And so I remember a lot of the conversations were based on stuff like that.
You helped us a lot as we tried to find where we could sell to early on, leverage a lot of your connections, maybe share some of those stories.
Well, my father-in-law was Mike Sherman, and in 2008, he became the head coach at Texas A&M. So I remember you guys maybe had a client or two, the Jets. I don't think the Browns were involved at that point. You had Nebraska, maybe not too many college teams, but there was a connection there with Texas A&M, and just getting you down there to meet with Mike Sherman. I think the first time you met with him, I was dating my wife at the time, his daughter, and we were in their house, and you just walked in the door, and he gave you maybe 10 minutes, and then he was out the door to go interview for the Arizona Cardinals head coaching job. So I don't think you were the main priority at that moment, as he was getting focused on trying to go get a head job. And then a couple years later, you kept coming back to Texas A&M, and hey, we want to, make a deal with you to help you guys use this for a couple months and see if you like it. And Mike Sherman is a tremendous coach. I always thought he was very innovative, but he is old school in his approach, and so new technology maybe made him a little bit nervous, and he turned it down year after year, 2008, 2009, 2010, no, even though you were offering it for basically nothing. And finally in 2011, I remember he'd said no about 10 times, and the offer was pretty much off the table at that point because you had enough clients elsewhere. And we're sitting in a staff meeting. He says to some of us graduate assistants, hey, is there any way we can get our playbook on YouTube or anything like that for incoming recruits? So I remember I almost had to stand up and leave the meeting. This is one of the things I've been preaching for 3 years. David's come down here and he's tried to sell it to you, and now you want to put it on YouTube for the whole world to share. So those were probably some of the struggles you faced early on, was A lot of coaches who've been in the profession, they're used to doing it a certain way for a long time. And new technology like this at the time was probably a little bit scary for a lot of people. And it was hard to grab hold, but certainly now, 15 years later, I wouldn't say you guys are having any issues with that.
I think you're exactly right on what it was like in those days. Maybe I wasn't also the best salesperson, so that could be part of the problem too, but definitely some lessons we learned. So maybe take us a step further back. You were the star quarterback at Norman High School in Oklahoma. You were a local legend from everything that I've heard from people down there. What can you tell us about your recruiting process?
There weren't a lot of recruits coming out of Oklahoma at the time. So I was really the only quarterback from the state of Oklahoma, I think, that had offers. Wasn't a heavily recruited state. So I remember refreshing the Rivals page 1,000 times over. I could tell you I remember this. I was probably the 24th or 25th ranked pro-style quarterback in the country coming out of high school, which isn't very impressive. But I could probably name you the 23 guys in front of me, and how their careers went. And because you looked at it every day, that was the only resource you had to stack yourself up against kids from California and Texas, Pennsylvania, and the Tyler Palcos of the world, and the Drew Olsons and the Vince Youngs. And those were the names I heard, but you never saw any video of them. And Rivals had a camp that you could go to and get your picture taken, your height and weight, and then your picture would come up on the profile. That was like Rivals 2001. I mean, your picture went up there, one picture. I was wearing a green flannel shirt. It was hideous. I can't believe I did it. So you went to this, you kind of met a couple of the prospects, and then to get yourself recruited, you had to take your VHS copies of every game you had. So if you played 10 games, 10 VHS copies, and you had to dub them, almost like you were making a CD mixtape back in the day, where we had to dub over those mixtapes in the late 90s. That's what you had to do for recruiting. So you had to stop the play. If you wanted to play on the highlight, you had to rewind it, put the other tape in. And it was a grueling, week-long process to make this highlight tape on a VHS. And then you had to go I probably made 60 copies, my dad did, and sent them all across the country. You had to hope that school you sent it to didn't lose it in the mail, or a recruiting intern didn't misplace it, because it was hard to make those tapes, and you had to be pretty selective with who you're going to send them to, and try to get your name out there. And it was a tough process back then.
I'm sure a lot of our coaches on this call also remember those days closely, but talk us through, before you were in the NFL for a while, went back to college, coaching as offensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bearcats, before you came back to the NFL. Talk us through what it was like on the other side of the process.
Sure. Well, I can take you back. I was a GA at Texas A&M for 4 years, from 2008 to 2011. And, getting tape on Huddle wasn't really happening then. You might get a couple YouTube links, but mostly it was you were getting DVDs. And so, we had this big library in one of the offices, and they had to catalog all the DVDs. And, a coach would get mad if you lost a kid from their area that he wanted the other position coach to watch. If they get lost, somebody's getting their butt ripped, And so I then go to the Miami Dolphins for 4 years, from 2012 to 2015. So I come back to college in 2016. And in those 4 years, recruiting had changed dramatically because of Huddle. There was Huddle Recruit. And so I remember calling you with all these questions, because I hadn't really been exposed to it, and everybody else I was working with had. And, at that point, I went from only being able to watch the DVD that a kid sent in 2011 to now being able to watch their practices. If the coaches had allowed you to watch their practices, you had every game on every kid. So you could watch, a kid from Elder High School in Cincinnati. I could watch every game he's played in instantly, if we had Huddle Recruit in that region particularly. So it just made things so much simpler. You could watch a highlight tape if you chose to watch a highlight tape, or you could go back and do it the longer way and watch, 5 or 6 actual games of a kid playing if you had more questions on them. So it's just made it so much easier. Now just to go to Huddle and type in a kid's name and be able to watch all the different videos that they share and the coaches share, made our job so much easier.
So now we'll fast forward back to this past season. Obviously, it was a COVID year that none of us are looking to repeat, hopefully ever. Talk us through just how things changed and how you assess talent for the draft and free agency, and how you just stayed connected and coached remotely.
So last year, the pro days were going on in March. And I remember being at Clemson probably on March 18th. And during that pro day, that was one of the first pro days of the year. Probably been in the process for about a week. Pro days usually go from March 10th to April 10th. So that was March 17th or 18th. We're at Clemson's pro day, and word is getting around the pro day that everyone's getting pulled off the road. And the next day, Michigan's was already canceled. So that was the talk of the the pro day. So everyone was realizing that this thing is for real and it's going to really affect the way that we do things. So we all went back to the offices and there was no more pro days. And so at that point, you really had to quickly shift gears. And we didn't know what Zoom was. So now you're calling the kids and doing conference calls with them. And then in Zoom, I think kind of popped up around April for us, where now we got 20 days where we can try to figure out how to use this Zoom thing and get some face-to-face with some of these guys and ask some of the questions. But it certainly caught us off guard and made you have to adjust quickly. It was really trial and error as the offseason got canceled and you could only do virtual meetings with the players starting from April 25th to June 20th. We had to figure out, how do you keep these NFL players' attention? How are we going to Zoom for 60 minutes a day and keep their attention in a team meeting, with 90 guys on the Zoom, and position meetings and unit meetings. We have a rookie quarterback. How are we going to make that work? So we had to be really creative with how we did things. We wanted it to be fun. We knew that an hour of just boring install, a lot of these guys, doesn't keep their attention that way. So we would create walkthroughs on the Zoom. I would call Joe Burrow. I'd mute my screen. I'd call him. I'd give him a call. He would then unmute his screen. He'd call a play like he was in the huddle. We'd break the huddle, pretend like you're walking the line of scrimmage. The center would then ID the mic and make all his protection calls. And then Joe Burrow would fake send a motion and he'd give a cadence, because those were the reps that we were going to miss from having no offseason. So you had to be creative in that way. We also had a lot of new players that we'd signed in free agency or the draft that our team would not meet until potentially August 1st, 30 days before the season starts. So we had to think of ways to recreate the camaraderie that they would be getting in the locker room. So we divided a 90-man team up into, I think, 10 teams of 9. There was a draft that took place. We divided up the players, and we had competitions: best TikTok video, best golf trick shot video, best house, And so each player on the team had to pick the one talent they were going to try to embrace. And so we got to know a lot of the free agents and draft picks that way. So that they felt like they were part of the team. They had a good feel for their teammates before they showed up in August, because really we were 3 months behind in that regard of developing that chemistry and those relationships on the team.
So obviously we have no idea what this offseason is going to look like, but are there certain aspects of it you'd like to pull forward that you think you'll keep even in a non-COVID time?
I think you have more interaction with the draft prospects than we would in years past. Typically we would have gone to a pro day, interviewed the kid at the pro day, maybe seen him at the combine. But now we'll be allowed 5 one-hour Zoom meetings with each prospect. And so now you'll be able to go to the pro day, watch the kid, but then be able to Zoom with him. You'll probably end up doing it 3 to 5 times to get to know him a little bit better than you probably would have in years past, because you didn't realize you had that tool at your disposal. Now that we're also familiar with it and used to it, we'll use that better. I also think that you can get free agents that you signed during the season up to speed a little bit sooner. So instead of them having to beat around the office, try to learn the offense, you can, some of our quality control guys can meet with them at night on Zoom, so they don't have to be in the office all the time, and try to get them up to speed. So there will be a lot of ways that Zoom, I think, impacts the way we do things going forward for the next, 5 or 6 years.
Nice. I'm always looking for those takeaways of things that actually were positives that can come out of the pandemic. So that's good to hear. All right, one final question. So looking back on your high school days and kind of knowing what you know about how high school and college coaches operate, what's one thing that you'd love to see transfer from your NFL workflows that you have now back into the high school or into the college game?
Well, just number one, what we look for in kids that we draft is real height, weight, speed, the measurable stuff. And for example, Michigan's a school that does a great job. When we're watching draft prospects, you actually see a physical picture of the guy in their underwear, and so you can see all those measurables yourself. You can see what their actual height is, what the weight is on the scale, and what their arm length is, what their hand size is, what their wingspan is, all that kind of stuff. And it's always difficult, I think, when you're in college or high school to get those accurate numbers from people. If you're at the next level trying to recruit those kids. And so I know that there's a lot of things that have happened in the landscape of recruiting where people try to get accurate information, but if that could ever improve, I think that's a big help when you're scouting prospects. I wish in high school and in college, I wasn't just watching tape just to watch tape. I actually knew what I was doing. And so I think I had tremendous coaches. Of course, I never said, hey, I want you to teach me how to watch tape better, so it's on me. But I also wish that they would have taken the initiative to really sit down and say, okay, you played a game on a Friday night, you're starting to prepare for your opponent on Sunday or Monday, whatever it is. Sit down with the player and teach them what they should be looking for, so they're not just in there checking a box saying I watched 2 hours of tape, but you really didn't gain any information from it. Make a specific cut up for them. One thing I started doing when I was in college, because I got the sense that those guys weren't used to watching tape or how to do it, I would divide up a game amongst 4 of the quarterbacks in the room, and I would make, starting quarterback, you've got plays 1 through 25 of Bowling Green versus Kent State, Kent State's defense, and you're gonna drop all 22 guys as they lined up on the first play of the game, what the down and distance was, what the front was in your own terms, what the coverage was, what the depth of the corner was, what the depth of safety was in his alignment. I want the offensive formation. And then I want you to actually draw the scheme of the play. So draw the run scheme that happened, draw how the defense fit it, what the coverage was, and do that for 25 straight plays. And by then, you're going to have an understanding of where all the defenders lined up, what their jersey numbers are, what corner's usually off and what corner's tight, what linebacker tends to pressure a little bit more. And so we divide up a game where all 4 quarterbacks had, each of them had 25 snaps. And then we come together at the end of the week and talk about it. And I think that quickly allowed them to visualize what they were facing and some of the things the coaches were talking about. Hey, here's coverages you're going to see, here's pressures. They really had to do it for themselves. Because one thing I learned when I got done playing at Nebraska and started GAing and I had to break down tape, I remember breaking down a whole game's worth of tape thinking, oh my God, if I had to do this when I was playing at Nebraska, I would have learned so much more, so much quicker. Even though I had great coaches, I would have actually understood what they were trying to tell me. And I could have learned the game plan maybe a little bit sooner during the week of what we were trying to attack and what the defense specialized in. So I just think those are some things that, if I went back and coached in college, I coached in high school, those are some things I would try to help my guys with if they were capable of handling all that information.
That's awesome. Not only some good history and good takeaways from Huddle's early beginnings, but some great takeaways for coaches to improve their craft and make their players better. This was a lot of fun, Zach. I really appreciate you making the time today.
Thanks for having me, David. It was a blast. And again, you guys are proud of what you guys have done. And I can imagine it's only going to get bigger and better as you go forward.
Well, thank you and good luck this season.
Appreciate it. Go Huskers.
All right. So once again, we appreciate all of you joining us this week, and we hope that you're looking forward to hearing from some of the top minds in football. We've talked a little bit about the past, but the exciting stuff is what lies in the future. I'd like to turn it over to John Wirth to share some of the big product updates we've been working on.